What is the Dunning-Kruger effect, and why is it risky if you're not aware of what it is? So go ahead and hang out with us after the intro here, and we're going to attempt to answer that question, and we're going to work through some of the business impacts or organizational impacts of the concept, and look for some of your feedback too on your experiences. So let's go ahead and roll the intro. This is Plays Well with Others.
This is Plays Well with Others. Thanks for listening.
All right. So we've already recorded this podcast before we hit the record button, which is disappointing, but it's an interesting conversation. So we've been talking a lot at work and in our team about the Dunning-Kruger effect, which for those of you that are not familiar, and I don't expect all of you to be familiar with it, the Dunning-Kruger effect is the idea that when you first start learning something, your confidence outpaces your competence. So you get very quickly, you learn a lot about a little, or excuse me, a little about a lot, and you realize that, oh, okay, this is kind of cool. I know a lot about this. That point is called the peak of Mount Stupid. And that is what happens when you get to this very early point of learning a skill or learning a trade, and you think you know it all, and you really don't, which it's immediately followed by the valley of despair. It only takes a little bit more learning to realize, oh no, there is a ton I don't know.
It's so funny because I vividly remember going through this journey at so many points in my life. I mean, like even when I first started in the professional world and I started using Excel and I was like, I'm so good at Excel. And then I turned a corner and I was like, oh my God, I know nothing about this tool or what it's capable of. And I've done it with every tool after that I've been like, oh yeah, I've got this. I'm so good at this. Oh no, never mind.
Yeah, and following the valley of despair.
That one really I was like, I can do this. And then I was like, oh no, I can't.
That's probably one of the better examples, because to be able to write your first select statement takes 30 seconds of learning.
Yeah. I mean, being able to take somebody else's and, bastardize it into what you want it to do, that's where you're like, I can do this. And then when you try and write your own for the first time, you're like, never mind. I'm sorry. I got cocky. I deserved this moment of humility. I apologize.
Every engineer, I feel confident in saying, every engineer has screwed up a update statement or has written a very, very large query without a no-lock and has brought down production. Guarantee it.
I'm in pain for all of you. That's when
the peak of Mount Stupid fights back.
That's how you get crushed under Mount Stupid, yeah.
So I buried the lead a little bit in the intro. So I said, what is Dunning-Kruger and why is it dangerous? Or something to that effect. It's been 3 minutes, so I've already forgotten what I said. But Dunning-Kruger is something that we all experience. It's not so much a syndrome as it is a descriptor of how we learn as humans.
Yeah, just the path we take.
And so if you're not self-aware, if you're not aware of the Dunning-Kruger effect and how it impacts you and when you are on the peak of Mount Stupid, you can make a lot of decisions thinking you know a lot more than you do. And when you make those decisions, you can often, within several months, you've made it through the valley of despair and you realize that your decision was a bad one because you didn't know what you didn't know. We are in danger from the unknown unknowns.
Mm-hmm.
So what we wanted to do today to hash through is how to recognize Dunning-Kruger at various stages in your professional or personal life. Because I'm interested and concerned when you can't recognize it in yourself or you can't recognize it in other people. Because then you wind up following down a path without raising your hand and saying, this might not be a good choice.
Yeah. Well, and I think there's, how do I say this? There's a typical experience a lot of people have had where they have a leader that knows a little bit about a certain area, and they, because they're the person who is the highest rank in a room, maybe comes up with a solution or comes up with a theory on how to move forward with something that they know a little bit about, enough to be dangerous about. And because they're at the peak of Mount Stupid, they think they know enough to make executive decisions on a topic that really, while they are a steward of the people who are doing that work, they are not actually the ones doing that work and shouldn't actually be making those decisions in such a unilateral fashion. So being aware, especially as an executive, that knowing enough to be dangerous about something does not qualify you for making unilateral decisions. And instead, you should look to the people doing the job and be a good leader by lifting up their voices so that the people who are actually experts in this area can weigh in. And then you can make an informed decision based off of the weigh in of all the people within your charge. So just a little snapshot of why that's really important to understand.
Yeah, precisely. And there's the third co-host. It's been like 20 episodes, or 30 episodes maybe.
She really wants to make another debut.
Yeah, apparently. Let's deal with this real quick. So I think that's a big risk, because we've all had that executive that comes out strong with a strong opinion stated as fact, and the expectation is that their direct reports or their colleagues will call them on it and say, well, I think this is good, but this is not, or let's take this a different direction, or I disagree. Mm-hmm. But and I think I've quoted the manager's handbook just about every episode, and then immediately complained that it's sitting downstairs instead of on my desk. But
one of these days we'll get to see
this
it.
would be the point where I would show you the book. It's a solid book. If you haven't read it, go pick it up. But the perspective in the manager's handbook, David Dodson lays out, is that as the leader in the room, as the most senior person in the room, you should be the one speaking last, not first. That way you give everybody a chance to say their piece and come out with an opinion. And then you can say, well, yeah, I agree with these points, or I like these perspectives, but what about XYZ? And you're leading your team that way rather than directing your team.
And it allows you to, circumvent the ramifications of being on top of Mount Stupid, right? Like, you can still be stuck on Mount Stupid because you don't fully understand a concept without actually making terrible decisions that impact your company. Yeah. You can be there and recognize that, hey, like, I'm feeling super confident about this topic, but maybe I'm not actually as confident as I as I feel. So I love the idea of calling on or having other people speak first. And I think one thing I've loved about, good leaders I've had in the past is they'll call on people too. The quiet person in the room who maybe doesn't participate as much, or who's maybe not as comfortable sharing their opinion, they'll say, hey, I'm curious to hear what you have to say about this. And as the leader, that's immediately sharing your level of respect with another colleague and giving them the platform in such a way that they will be listened to and their input will be valued. So there's a way to use that, VP title in a positive way to help drive the conversation more successful.
Yeah, and I gotta say, I am well aware that this could be sort of a straightforward approach, right? Like, there's Dunning-Kruger curves to leadership as well that sort of sit on top of other decision making. So you're totally allowed to be on top of Mount Stupid. It's like, I've got a season pass, right? So if you know you're there, journey,
right?
It is. If you know you're there, be candid that you know a little about a lot in this situation, and go into a conversation knowing as much as you can. Like, don't use the Dunning-Kruger effect as an excuse to not go learn, because it's totally okay to be on Mount Stupid. Use it as an opportunity to recognize how much you've had the opportunity to learn thus far. And then when you go into the conversation with your team, say, all right, look, this is what I know. I fully expect that there is more to it, but here's where we start, and this is what I'm expecting to get out of it, and then see what happens. I think the biggest risk that you have in letting your team speak first is that dreaded silence. And you say, all right, what do we want to do? And everybody just kind of looks around and says, I don't know. I don't want to be the one to make the call. In that case, you're going to be tempted to start talking because the uncomfortable silence has shown up and you don't like silence. So you can either sit there for the duration of the 30-minute meeting looking at each other, or you can start asking questions. I think we've said this before. Questions are almost always better than statements when it comes to making decisions and coming up with a way to approach a problem.
Used to work with an architect who that was always his strategy. When he would sit down, you'd ask him a question and he would start by asking you questions. Well, what do you think we should do? Well, where are you coming from? Why is that your idea? Follow that through to its logical conclusion and tell me how this is going to end up. And he would prompt you to think through the topic on your own. So not only did you get to the right answer eventually, or get to, maybe the best answer collectively, but you also learned so much along the journey because different people were interjecting their experiences and their understandings. And so you collectively as a group were being brought further along the Dunning-Kruger scale of, learning together. So it was a very, very, very nice way to handle a conversation like that.
Well, it makes your gut reaction or your habitual reaction to start being understanding as opposed to providing an opinion or providing a position. Particularly a position based on dated or bad information, right? Yeah, how many times I think we had a conversation today about how to get to the bottom of requirements when you have a very brief, simple ask. It sounds easy, sounds great, let's do that. And then you start digging, and the deeper you dig, you realize the more complex the problem is and the more thought
really
it requires.
Yeah. And there's no right journey to always get to the right answer. You might follow the same path 3 times and come up with, 3 different things of this one was great, this one wasn't so great. And, there really is no perfect path for it. You kind of have to feel out each individual scenario.
Well, it starts with that self-awareness and call it intrapersonal awareness. So I've got to recognize when I'm on top of Mount Stupid, and I've got to recognize when you're on top of Mount Stupid. That second part requires a bit more finesse and I'll say confidence too, right? Because nobody wants to be told, hey, you don't know as much as you think you do. So you've got to have
a fun thing to hear.
No, you've got to know a way to introduce that into the conversation.
Yeah.
I think it can be easier in a technology conversation than it is with other things. Like I can't imagine trying to explain to somebody that their business acumen isn't as good as they think it is, or their understanding of workflow isn't as good as they think it is.
All right, so I have a question for everyone, and I want you to answer in the comments what your opinion is if you have had the experience like me of being in both a business role and in a technology role. Because I actually feel like, and I don't know if this is just because I've been on great technology teams, but I actually feel like when you walk into a room in a technology group, you tend to, everyone has a goal of let's find an answer, let's solve the problem, let's figure out how to get to the right answer. And there's a lot of back and forth commentary. There's not a lot of, most people don't get mad when you say, hey, like I have a different opinion. Let's look at it this way. What about this? And I've seen it gone poorly in technology as well. But I have noticed when I've walked into a room and it's more of a business group of people, not a technology group of people, I do end up feeling like there's more of a penchant for people listening to the most powerful person in the room, getting their opinion, and then everyone else figures out how to make that happen. And that tends to be the flow of the conversation. And again, I don't know if it's just because of the groups I've worked on, so I'm curious if you guys have had similar experiences.
I think you just haven't asked the right questions in the technology room.
No, there have definitely been times, but my point isn't that it's always hunky-dory and nobody fights. That's not the point. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is it's not the most powerful person in the room who's like, we're going to do this, and everyone figures out how to do it. It's generally a back and forth between maybe some more vocal parties or maybe some more passionate individuals to try and figure out what the right answer is.
I think that largely comes from technical leaders having come from a technical contributor role. Is that I've worked for technology leaders that weren't very good technologists, and they make decisions on top of Mount Stupid. Like I don't mean to be harsh, but it's important to clarify the point. A lot of times you wind up working for people in technology that aren't technologists themselves because of corporate structure or alignment
and
and
I
things
would
like
argue
that.
you start to slide into that business process or that business mindset where you're listening to the most powerful person in the room, and that can have some tragic endings.
It can, and it's very risky, as it's very dependent on who that leader is. They have to
Absolutely.
know if they're on top of Mount Stupid or not.
Yeah.
And if they don't, or if they refuse to accept it, then that's where things get hairy real fast, because that's when things start becoming authoritarian, and you're going to build this way, and all the downsides be darned.
That was a great way to say that. I'm so happy you phrased it that way.
That will not be one of the shorts, I don't think.
So let's kind of think through your question then, right? Why is it important to understand this? And I think, we've definitely kind of answered that in an abstract way. But what would you say, like, if somebody asked you that question and you had to give a succinct answer, why do you think it's important?
The self-awareness part, you mean?
Yeah.
So you have to be self-aware, period, in just about every situation. To succinctly answer why it's important to be self-aware regarding the Dunning-Kruger effect, you have to know how much confidence and authority you have to make a decision. Because if you don't, you will make the wrong decision or the right decision for the wrong reasons. And the farther out that decision impacts strategy, the more impactful it is. If you're off by a degree at 5 yards, it's probably not that big of a deal. But if you're off by a degree at 1,000 yards, you've missed the target, you've missed the berm, and you're in trouble.
There's something to be said for being able to have a conversation without putting yourself in a position where you're going to look stupid too. There's just a certain amount of professionalism that you gain by going, this is my understanding so far of the situation. You guys speak up if I'm misunderstanding. Am I summarizing this correctly? Do you guys agree with the summary of the situation? When you phrase things in a way that invite others to participate in the conversation and invite others to share, maybe differences of opinions, you don't need to be offended when somebody says, no, you're dumb, don't do it that way, because you're not putting in a position where they have to say that. They can go, oh yeah, I do actually have a different opinion, and this is kind of what I was thinking, and you can go, oh, thank you for bringing that up. I'm so glad you took my suggestion and brought up this really great point. And secondly, you don't leave the room and have everyone behind you go, my God, wish she had talked to anyone else, now we're gonna have to do this dumb idea. It really is such a positive thing professionally for you to walk into a conversation and invite feedback from others and invite others to participate, because you're not excluding anyone to to listen to your title.
Right. And so we're kind of, I think, intentionally excluding the concept or the approach to group decision making of playing the dumb guy, so that you can find out what everybody else really knows, right? So I think it's important, and I've seen it a lot more lately around job postings and requirements for executive tech roles. A lot of commentary is being added in on need to be able to call BS. You need to know enough to know when you're getting taken for a ride. And I think that's a part of Dunning-Kruger as well, because if you are a leader of any sort and you're sitting on top of Mount Stupid, then you're going to be very confident in your own skills and your own knowledge, and you're going to be partially defensive.
Oh.
So when somebody else, you've seen the guy when you everybody knows
I know
the
exactly
person.
what you're talking about. Yeah.
When you go in and
I've met
you just,
him.
yeah, well you can just feed him a line, right? This is complete BS. It's not true at all. But if you say it with enough confidence and enough authority, then that person just turns around, and because they don't want to look like they're on top of Mount Stupid, they'll say, yeah, absolutely, for sure. That's exactly how that works. No, it's not. So I think
it's trouble.
But I think that's a reflection of how our industry is maturing and how it matured so quick, or not matured, it grew so quickly that we developed a lot of people that didn't have the skill sets, but they have the title. And it's become sort of pervasive that you have all of these alleged technical leaders that don't know the core of what it is that they're leading, and they've not stayed up to date because, well, I'm a VP now, I'm not writing code, so I don't have to be on Stack Overflow. I don't have to be understanding what's changing. But I also, because I'm a VP, don't want to say I don't know.
It does. It creates a vortex of bad decisions. It can be really troublesome.
A vortex of bad decisions. I like that. That I was satisfied that the name of the episode, the title of the episode, was going to be the top of Mount Stupid, but vortex of bad decisions. Maybe we'll put that in our back pocket somewhere.
I think at the end of the day, leaders have so much to do with the temperature of an organization and how that organization performs together, and they can be the ones that set the standard for whether or not the entire team is going to get stranded on the top of Mount Stupid, or whether the team has an opportunity to take advantage of those that are on different places along the pathway along the journey of knowledge. And you're never going to have a VP who's going to be, coasting all the way through to sustainable understanding or whatever the end goal is. You're never going to have a VP who's across the board at that place. That's just not going to happen.
Right.
But you can, by understanding that you are a human and therefore susceptible to this downfall, you can be aware of it, self-aware, and you can manage your team and you can manage your own actions in such a way that they don't hopefully have too terrible an impact.
Yeah, and I think the more that I talk about this, the more I develop opinions and the more I think I understand about it. There's a concept in software architecture called the moment of last opportunity or latest opportunity, and that was going to sound really good because I pulled it off the top of my head, but I can't remember the exact term. But the idea is that when designing systems, designing applications, processes, whatever, you want to leave a decision to the absolute last minute that you can make it and still be on time, because we know that the longer we do things, the more we understand about it. Yeah. The deeper we dig, the more we know. And so I don't need to come in and say, Jess comes and says, we need a whole new notification platform. I don't need to come in on day one and say, all right, well, we're going to stand up an Apache Kafka cluster and we're going to put everything in DynamoDB and AWS before I start digging into, okay, well, what kinds of notifications are these?
What are going to be the different scenarios? How's the business going to use it? What's going to be the most valuable assets that we can derive out of this, etc.? I mean, those things are going to have an impact. So
the Dunning-Kruger effect should be in your head almost at all times. Is this a informed decision that I'm making? Is this an informed opinion that I have? Or am I basing my stance, my position on incomplete knowledge. Maybe on the other side, is this person sitting across the table from me, are they basing their opinion on incomplete knowledge? Both of which you have to do. It's your civic duty to do something about, whether it means asking better questions so that the other person recognizes what they don't know, or maybe it means asking better questions so that you can find out what you don't know.
So here's a little tip to you're the person who realizes that you have a leader who's on top of Mount Stupid, and you know that the leader doesn't realize that they're on top of Mount Stupid. One thing I have seen work really well is don't necessarily approach them directly in the conversation where you're having that initial conversation. Maybe they lay out a pathway. Maybe they have an idea on how to move forward and they're done. They want you to move forward with that. So what I've seen successfully kind of change someone's mind is a little bit of distance from that first conversation and then coming back in and reapproaching it as, you know, we had this conversation. It was fantastic. We had a couple of options on how we wanted to move forward. We did some research on the different options, present out kind of what the different opinions were, and let the leader recognize themselves that there's potentially another path forward that might work better. And that's not always going to work, but sometimes time and distance, or, you know, maybe not calling them out right in the moment, but giving them the cover of a second option that they can pick from, sometimes that can help remove ego a little bit from the conversation and let them, you know, hear out other opinions. It's a really good one, because there's a book that I like called Verbal Judo, and it's a book that helps you understand how to influence people's decision making, and it doesn't quite go to the depth of influence or some of the more psychologically based books, right?
But it's kind of written for the police officer or the person that needs to get a response out of a high pressure situation, and you always want to give the other person an out. So instead of coming at somebody and saying, do this right now, their choice when you demand something is, do I comply because of fear, or do I fight back because I don't want to be a lesser person that got beat up, essentially? And so you always come at conflict situations like that from a place of, help me, man, help me help you. So, like, look, none of us want to make a bad decision. None of us want to build the wrong thing.
Exactly.
So what I need from you is I need an understanding of what technical implications are there that's driving this decision, because I'm clearly not as well versed, or I don't know as much. So help me understand how you got to that conclusion. And it will either lead to a line, or it'll lead to, yeah, well, I don't actually know this much about this, but this is what I do know. Okay, fair enough, right?
I do think if you try and nail them to a corner in the middle of the conversation with everyone watching, it just creates unnecessary conflict. And, you know, sometimes there's necessary conflict that needs to happen in order to move forward with the right decision, if the decision has to be made that day or something. But I do think there's a lot to be said for allowing them to take a gracious step back and, you know, reevaluate.
So we're going to have to end this one here, but I think that is a good conversation. A reminder, as Jess mentioned, drop us a line in the comments, drop us a line on LinkedIn, social medias, wherever you find it, and let us know what your experience has been in situations where you're trying to make a decision, or you're a part of a decision, and either you're on top of Mount Stupid or the decision maker is. Let us know how that works out. When did you
realize you were the captain of Mount Stupid?
I'm the ticket taker.
King of the hill.
Man, yeah. That's a t-shirt and a half for sure. So let us know what you think. Let us know about any of the scenarios that we've described. If you've got different techniques, different skills, then let us know.
Yeah.
And with that, we're going to have to let you go as the third co-host screams again at the bottom
Needs
of the
dinner.
stairs. Yeah, apparently. So this has been Plays Well with Others. Thanks for listening.